Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reading Nook. Last time, we explored the concept of Blackness in scripture and law. Today, we're going to dig deeper into the colonial legacy of the British American colonies, including the mainland and the islands, before independence, emancipation, and the reclassification that came after. Let's dive into how colonial legal structures evolved and what that meant for the original inhabitants, especially those of darker skin tones. British colonial structure and legal identity. Let's set the stage. Before American independence, the British colonies were part of the vast British Empire. This meant that the people living in these colonies, including those who were freeborn, indentured servants, or even enslaved, were considered British subjects. They were entitled to the rights of Englishmen, which were grounded in common law, the Magna Carta, and often aligned with scriptural, Levitical, and ecclesiastical laws. Essentially, the law acknowledged a person's status as a subject of the British Crown, which carried specific rights and protections. Indentured servitude, for instance, was common in this period, and many people worked to pay off debts or the costs of passage to the colonies. Unlike the chattel slavery that became more entrenched later, indentured servitude was seen as a temporary status, more akin to a contractual obligation than the perpetual bondage that was institutionalized later. While not without its abuses, it was different from the racialized slavery system that developed post-independence. Shift to federal laws and reclassification. Now fast forward to after independence and the formation of the federal government. This is where we see a major shift. The newly established U.S. government began to implement laws and acts that reshaped the social and legal landscape significantly. Unlike the British colonial legal framework, which was based on the rights of Englishmen and had a more rigid hierarchy tied to British sovereignty, the federal government started passing acts like the Homestead Act, the Dawes Act, and other laws that redefined who could own land and how people were classified. These acts were more than just administrative. They were tools of reclassification. For example, the Dawes Act aimed to assimilate Native Americans by breaking up their communal lands into individual allotments. Similarly, the Homestead Act facilitated the redistribution of land, often to European settlers, while disenfranchising original populations, including those of darker skin tones, who were now being broadly reclassified as African American or Native American. These reclassifications stripped away specific identities, erasing connections to their British subject status and redefining them under new racial categories. Colonialism, legal structures, and reclassification. The colonial period under British rule was marked by legal structures that, at least nominally, upheld the rights of Englishmen, including those in the colonies. But with the emergence of the federal government, a new era of laws began, laws that sought to categorize and control. Where British law once recognized diverse statuses and aimed to uphold certain rights, the federal legal system reclassified people, often erasing their original heritage and rights in the process. This reclassification wasn't just about paperwork. It was about identity, land, and legal status. People who had been recognized as freeborn subjects or even as indentured servants working off a debt were now often lumped into broad categories that didn't accurately reflect their heritage or status. The legal shift also meant that previous forms of servitude tied to British debt obligations were reinterpreted and redefined, especially as racialized slavery became more codified under American law. Imagining an unaltered legacy. Now, imagine if these reclassifications hadn't happened. If the identities of the original people of the colonies, those who were swarthy, ruddy, or otherwise diverse, had been preserved, we would see a very different narrative. The colonial history of America would be a tapestry of complex identities, recognized rights, and legal standings that reflected the true diversity of its people. But as the federal government took over, the focus shifted from British legal protections to a system that redefined and often erased these diverse origins. Connecting to modern implications. Understanding this colonial legacy is crucial to seeing how today's legal and social structures were shaped. The federal laws that reclassified and marginalized groups based on race didn't just emerge from a vacuum. They were built on the foundation of colonialism, but diverged significantly from British legal precedents. This evolution has lasting impacts, influencing how racial identities and rights are perceived and enforced even now. That wraps up our dive into the colonial legacy of the British American colonies and the significant shifts that occurred after independence. From legal protections under British rule to the sweeping changes brought by the federal government, the history is complex, layered, and still deeply relevant today. Thanks for tuning in to the Reading Nook. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into history, law, and identity. See you in the next one.